Naomi Steele stood in front of the mirrored wall of Harrington Vaughan Global's headquarters, her reflection blurred slightly by the sheen of glass and morning sunlight. The skyscraper loomed upward into the sky like it had been designed to intimidate, and in many ways it had. This was no ordinary company. It was a fortress of power. For over 3 decades, Harrington Vaughan had dominated the consulting world, securing billion-dollar contracts and reshaping industries. But it also had an unspoken reputation, whispered in boardrooms and break rooms alike. No black woman had ever risen beyond middle management here. Naomi knew that history, and she had no intention of becoming another cautionary tale. Her heels clicked sharply as she crossed the marble floor of the lobby. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a navy power suit with a tailored jacket and gold accents at the wrists. Strong, elegant, and impossible to ignore. A badge of belonging, even if belonging wasn't something anyone here planned to grant her. As she passed through security, she felt the weight of stares. Some were curious, some skeptical. A few were flatly dismissive. She'd read about this place before she accepted the job. People said it was impossible to crack, that the leadership circle was airtight. But Naomi had not come to survive. She had come to rise. Her new office was on the 15th floor, overlooking the city. It was spacious, modern, with steel gray furniture and a glass desk. A bouquet of lilies waited in a crystal vase, courtesy of human resources. On the far side of the room, a framed photo of the executive leadership team hung on the wall. 12 faces, all stern, all white, and not a single woman of color. Naomi's gaze lingered on it for a moment longer than she intended. A knock at her door drew her attention. Naomi Steele? The woman in the doorway had warm brown skin, silver-threaded curls pulled into a bun, and eyes that carried both weariness and kindness. She extended her hand. Dolores Grant. I work in operations. Thought I'd come welcome you before the vultures circle. Naomi smiled and shook her hand firmly. Vultures, huh? You'll see what I mean. Dolores leaned against the doorframe. I've been here 20 years. They'll let you work. They'll let you shine. But when it's time to climb, the ladder disappears. Naomi tilted her head. Then maybe it's time someone built a new ladder. Dolores studied her, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. That's the fire I used to have. The word settled like a warning and a blessing. Dolores left as quickly as she'd come, leaving Naomi with a curious ache in her chest. She wondered what Dolores might have achieved if the system hadn't worn her down. By midday, Naomi was scheduled to attend her first executive strategy meeting. She rehearsed her pitch mentally as she walked toward the glass-walled boardroom. Inside, the table stretched long and polished, a surface that reflected the power seated around it. Richard Vaughan, the COO, sat near the head. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back, his suit cut to precision. His reputation preceded him, ruthless, political, and utterly uninterested in change. Next to him sat Lucas Harrington, the CEO. Lucas's presence was quieter but no less commanding. He was mid-40s, tall, with sharp blue-gray eyes that missed nothing. His expression gave little away, a man who measured silence as carefully as words. Naomi took her seat midway down the table. As the meeting commenced, she watched patterns unfold. Richard dominated the room, steering conversations, dismissing certain voices with the flick of a phrase. The others followed his lead, eager to keep in his favor. When it came time to discuss a struggling client account, Naomi saw her opening. The firm had been bleeding revenue on a global logistics contract. The room debated incremental fixes, none of which addressed the root issue. I think we're looking at this backward, Naomi said, her voice steady but clear. Heads turned toward her. Richard arched an eyebrow, already prepared to pounce. Naomi leaned forward, clicking her tablet to project her analysis on the screen. The client's problem isn't just inefficiency, it's lack of integration across their supply chains. If we can centralize their systems through a unified AI-driven dashboard, we can cut costs by 15% within the first year. That's the kind of impact that keeps them loyal to us. A hush followed. The model she displayed was clean, innovative, and, most importantly, doable. Richard cleared his throat. That's ambitious. Perhaps too ambitious for a client already on the verge of walking away. We can't risk— Actually, Naomi interrupted, the greater risk is offering them mediocrity when they're looking for transformation. She didn't raise her voice, but her conviction filled the room. For the first time, Lucas Harrington spoke. You've run the numbers? Yes. 3 scenarios. Conservative, moderate, and aggressive. Even the conservative approach outperforms the current proposal. Lucas studied her for a long moment. His expression didn't change, but Naomi caught the flicker of interest in his eyes. He turned back to the table. Let her run with it. If she's right, we keep the client. If she's wrong, we know quickly enough. Richard's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. The meeting moved on. Naomi left with her pulse steady, though inside, adrenaline coursed through her veins. She knew she'd just taken a risk, but playing safe had never been an option. Later that evening, as she packed up her office, Dolores appeared again carrying a mug of tea. I heard what you did in there, Dolores said. Naomi glanced up. And it's the kind of move that makes them uncomfortable. Dolores set the mug on her desk. Uncomfortable can be good. Just, watch your back. Vaughn doesn't like being upstaged. Naomi sipped the tea, letting the warmth ground her. I didn't come here to play small. Dolores gave her a long look, then nodded slowly. Maybe you're exactly what this place needs. When Naomi finally left the building that night, the city stretched before her in a cascade of lights. She thought of her younger sister, Sierra, who had begged her not to dim her shine for anyone. She thought of Dolores carrying decades of battle scars, and she thought of Lucas Harrington, who had said little, but had given her room to prove herself. The story of Harrington Vaughn had always been written without women like her. But tonight, for the first time, Naomi felt the faint tremor of change. And she intended to turn that tremor into an earthquake. Naomi Steele had barely been with Harrington Vaughn Global for 6 weeks when the resistance became impossible to ignore. It wasn't open hostility. No one stormed into her office demanding she leave, and no one scrawled slurs on her reports. The resistance here was more elegant, more polished, and therefore more dangerous. It showed itself in half-smiles that didn't reach the eyes, in credit that mysteriously shifted names on final presentations, in invitations that never reached her inbox for after-hours networking events where real deals were made. The silence was loud. She had expected challenges. She hadn't expected the precision with which the system excluded her, the way it operated like a well-oiled machine designed to grind ambition into dust. On a Friday morning, Naomi walked into a project review session, ready to present updates on the AI-driven logistics system she had spearheaded. The plan had impressed Lucas Harrington himself, and early testing showed the numbers were promising. But when she entered the room, Richard Vaughn was already at the head of the table, gesturing confidently to a slide deck on the screen. And this initiative, Richard said, his voice smooth, is exactly the kind of forward-thinking solution we pride ourselves on delivering. Naomi froze. Slide by slide, he was presenting her work, her research, her numbers, her strategy. She sat down, fingers tightening around her pen. He hadn't even changed the color scheme of her charts. When the presentation ended, polite applause filled the room. Naomi leaned forward. Interesting overview, Richard, she said evenly. I recognize the framework. I developed the model 2 weeks ago. If you'll allow, I can walk the team through some of the deeper data points that support those projections. A ripple passed through the room. Richard's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. Of course, Naomi. If you'd like to add commentary, as if her work were a footnote to his. She presented the details calmly, refusing to let her anger bleed through. By the time she finished, the room knew the truth. The plan was hers. Richard had simply tried to put his name on it. When the meeting broke up, Naomi gathered her materials. Dolores caught her in the hallway, shaking her head. "They've been doing this for years," Dolores said quietly. "Taking credit, dismissing, locking us out. I used to fight. Then I realized the more I pushed, the more they found ways to erase me. It's exhausting." Naomi studied her colleague's face, the faint lines of fatigue, the resignation in her tone. "Why didn't you leave?" Dolores gave a bitter smile. "Because sometimes survival feels like the only victory. But you've got the kind of fire they can't ignore." That night, Naomi called her younger sister. Sierra's laughter crackled through the phone line like sunlight. "You sound tired," Sierra said immediately. Naomi sank onto her sofa, heels abandoned by the door. "It's like fighting shadows. They don't say no to my face, they just erase me behind my back. You knew it wouldn't be easy." "I knew," Naomi admitted. "But knowing doesn't make it less heavy." On the other end of the line, Sierra was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, "Don't let them shrink you, Naomi. You didn't get here to be erased. You got here because you're meant to change something, even if you don't see it yet." The words lodged in Naomi's chest. She closed her eyes, letting her sister's faith steady her. The turning point came 2 weeks later. Naomi had been overseeing a new client acquisition project worth millions. The proposal was airtight, the numbers strong, the client ready to sign, and then, at the 11th hour, documents went missing, data sets vanished, and Naomi's team was blindsided in a live call. Her stomach dropped as she pieced it together. This wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately sabotaged the files, and she didn't need a detective to guess who stood to benefit. Richard Vaughn. The fallout could have been catastrophic, but instead of panicking, Naomi moved fast. She called in her analysts, rebuilt the missing data from backups, and worked through the night to redesign the pitch deck. By morning, her team delivered a revised proposal directly to Lucas Harrington's office. Lucas looked up from the deck, eyes narrowing slightly. "You turned this around in less than 12 hours? "Yes," Naomi said simply, "because the client deserves better than excuses." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Do you know how many people would have folded under pressure like that? I don't fold." Lucas's lips curved. Not quite a smile, but something close. "I see that." He set the deck down. "The board will need to review this, but I want you to present it yourself. No intermediaries." Naomi blinked. "You mean, not Richard?" "I mean exactly what I said," Lucas replied. His tone was clipped, but his eyes betrayed the faintest flicker of approval. "Prepare your team. You'll lead the pitch." As she left his office, adrenaline coursed through her veins. For the first time, someone in power had cut through the fog and placed responsibility squarely in her hands. But she also knew what that meant. She had just made herself a target. The following week, Naomi stood in front of the board, every nerve on edge but every word crisp and deliberate. She walked them through projections, risks, and mitigation strategies with the precision of a surgeon. The client representatives nodded, asked sharp questions, and left visibly reassured. When the session ended, polite murmurs filled the room. Naomi gathered her notes. She caught Lucas watching her from across the table. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze lingered longer than it should have. Later that afternoon, her phone buzzed. An internal message, simple and direct. "Lucas Harrington requests a private meeting. 7 p.m. His office." Naomi stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. She didn't know what he wanted. Recognition? Warning? Some test of loyalty? But she knew one thing. The resistance around her was only growing stronger. And if she was going to survive, no, if she was going to win, she had to understand the man who sat at the very top. The man who, for the first time, seemed to see her as more than a name on a report. The news hit Harrington Vaughan Global like a thunderclap. A major client, one of the firm's largest international accounts, was threatening to sever ties, citing concerns about diversity practices after a widely circulated article highlighted the company's history, or lack thereof, in promoting women of color. Board members scrambled. Emails flew at all hours. The tension was palpable, a storm rolling through the upper floors of the skyscraper Naomi Steele now called her workplace. She had known this moment might come, though not exactly like this. The board's panic was tangible, their anxiety sharpened by the looming risk of reputational and financial damage. The usual gatekeepers, the people who preferred the comfort of tradition, began pointing fingers. And, as Naomi had anticipated, Richard Vaughn did not hesitate to attempt shifting blame toward her. "You pushed the initiative too hard," he said in a closed-door meeting with Lucas. "This is on Naomi." Her focus on diversity, while commendable, stirred unnecessary controversy. The client could walk because of her. Lucas Harrington's piercing blue-gray eyes cut him off. "No. This is on us. On the company. And it's our responsibility to handle it responsibly. Naomi has been consistent, professional, and proactive. If anything, she's the only one thinking strategically about long-term impact." Richard's lips pressed into a thin line, but Lucas dismissed him with a gesture. Naomi, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, felt a surge of resolve. She knew this was the moment to turn the storm into an opportunity. She requested a meeting with Lucas, and he agreed without hesitation. As she entered his office, she sensed a shift in his demeanor, more receptive, more willing to consider bold moves. Lucas gestured toward the seat opposite his desk. "The board is anxious. This could get messy fast. What do you suggest?" Naomi exhaled slowly, gathering her thoughts. "We turn this challenge into a strategic advantage. We don't just respond defensively. We present a new initiative, a company-wide diversity and inclusion strategy integrated with global business objectives. We show the client that we don't just talk about change, we implement it, and that it benefits business outcomes directly." Lucas leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Go on." She outlined a comprehensive plan: mentorship programs for underrepresented employees, revised promotion policies, targeted outreach to global clients emphasizing inclusive leadership and performance metrics tied to both financial success and diversity outcomes. Naomi's voice was calm, authoritative, and precise. She projected confidence that even the most skeptical board members could not ignore. "And the implementation?" Lucas asked, his gaze steady. "I lead it," Naomi said. "I oversee execution with a dedicated team. The board will receive weekly updates. The client sees results within 90 days. Lucas studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Do it. I trust you to handle this." The next week was a whirlwind. Naomi's plan was met with both excitement and resistance. Some board members saw it as revolutionary. Others, particularly those accustomed to maintaining traditional hierarchies, bristled. Richard Vaughn was visibly tense, though he kept his objections measured in meetings, preferring behind-the-scenes maneuvering. Naomi's strategy meetings became her battlefield. She coordinated teams across departments, integrating diversity objectives with business KPIs. She trained managers, adjusted workflows, and tracked results meticulously. Every presentation she gave to the board highlighted both the ethical and financial benefits of the new approach. Slowly, the company began to shift under her influence, the culture bending toward progress in ways that had once seemed impossible. Then came the day of the client presentation. Naomi stood in the conference room with the client representatives, prepared to defend the firm's reputation and demonstrate the tangible results of her plan. She spoke with clarity and authority, outlining the strategies her team had implemented and the measurable improvements in both operational efficiency and organizational diversity. The clients listened intently, asked pointed questions, and were visibly impressed. By the end of the session, they were smiling, nodding, and shaking hands. Harrington Vaughn Global's account was not only secure, it was stronger than before. Back in the executive suite, Lucas summoned the board. "I'm appointing Naomi Steele as Vice President of Strategy," he announced. Silence filled the room. She will oversee company-wide strategic initiatives, including those tied to diversity and inclusion, effective immediately. The declaration was electric. Naomi, the first black woman in senior leadership, felt a surge of disbelief and triumph. She had anticipated resistance, and it arrived in subtle waves, skeptical glances, whispered doubts, and the faint tension that accompanies monumental change. But she had anticipated that too. Dolores Grant, standing quietly at the edge of the room, gave Naomi a small, proud smile. "You didn't just open the door," she said softly. "You built a path." Naomi felt the weight of that statement. She was not only stepping into a new role herself, but creating opportunities for those who had been overlooked before her. Every careful maneuver, every late night, every strategic conversation had led to this moment. Even Richard Vaughn, who had opposed her at nearly every turn, could not argue with results. Lucas, who had once been distant and unreadable, finally allowed a flicker of genuine admiration into his expression. He had watched her navigate obstacles with intelligence, patience, and grace, and he was beginning to see the depth of her capability, and perhaps the depth of her character. Naomi's first boardroom meeting as vice president of strategy was unlike any she had attended before. She sat at the head of the table, flanked by executives who were now accountable to her in new ways. The atmosphere was charged, a mixture of anticipation, skepticism, and respect. She outlined quarterly objectives, tied directly to both financial and diversity metrics, and fielded challenging questions with precision. Each response reinforced her authority, and by the end of the meeting, the board members' expressions had shifted, from cautious resistance to measured acknowledgement. Afterward, Dolores found her in her new office. "I've watched you walk through doors I could only press against for decades," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And you didn't just walk through, you carried us with you." Naomi nodded, feeling the weight and honor of her journey. "I'm only the first," she said, "but I refuse to be the last." That evening, Lucas appeared at her office door. "You've changed a lot of minds today," he said, his usual calm demeanor softened by a trace of admiration. "Including mine." Naomi smiled faintly. "I didn't come here to be noticed. I came here to make change." "And you have," he admitted. There was a pause, an unspoken understanding between them that transcended titles and strategy. Respect had grown into something quieter, deeper, a recognition of shared purpose and integrity. Naomi looked out at the city from her office window. Lights shimmered like stars caught in glass, stretching endlessly in every direction. She thought of Dolores and all the women who had come before her, waiting for change that never arrived. She thought of Sierra, her sister, who had reminded her of her worth when the resistance felt unbearable, and she thought of Lucas, whose approval no longer felt like permission, but a recognition of partnership and vision. The path forward would not be easy. Change by its nature was resisted. There would be board members who grumbled, colleagues who whispered, and challenges yet to come. But Naomi had shattered the ceiling that had held her and countless others back. She had proven that talent, determination, and courage could reshape a company from the inside. And as she prepared for her first speech to the company as vice president of strategy, Naomi felt a profound sense of purpose. She wasn't just the first black woman in senior leadership. She was a symbol of what was possible when excellence refused to be constrained by prejudice or tradition. When she stepped onto the stage before the entire company, Naomi's voice was steady, strong, and full of vision. She spoke of resilience, opportunity, and the future of Harrington Vaughan Global, a future where talent and merit would define leadership, not bias or tradition. She shared her journey, acknowledging those who had paved the way and those who would follow. And she ended with words that resonated in every corner of the room. "I may be the first, but I refuse to be the last." The applause was thunderous. She felt it deep in her chest, a validation not of her ego, but of her purpose. And in that moment, Naomi Steele knew that she had not only transformed a company, but had begun to reshape a legacy. The breakthrough was not just hers. It belonged to every voice that had been silenced, every ambition that had been overlooked, and every door that had been unfairly closed. As the lights of the auditorium reflected off the windows behind her, Naomi allowed herself a brief smile. The path ahead was wide open, and she would walk it with her head held high, carrying everyone who had come before her, and making space for those who would follow. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. Your love, comments, and shares mean everything to me. Grateful for each of you. Let's keep growing together.